Happy Monday. I hope you had a nice weekend. Mine was not so great. Chris was sick all weekend, and then yesterday Shannon got the creeping crud. And so we were up until 4:30 in the morning, changing 2 sets of sheets and having a real fun time with the flu here with Shannon. So I'm not out in my studio today. I'm inside, and I'm going to be inside. It's 2 o'clock. It's a lot later than I had planned on starting my demonstration video, but I'm here, and I have until midnight, till Monday's over. So actually I think I only have 30 minutes because I'm new on YouTube and they limit my time. So what I'm going to demonstrate today is a cookbook, and it's going to be in watercolor. And the reason I started sketching in watercolors last year when my husband and I took a trip. I had never been to Europe, and my husband booked a 1-week Norwegian cruise to 3 different countries in Europe, and it was, I think, the best time I've ever had on a trip. It was amazing. And I didn't want to travel to internationally. I don't travel internationally a lot, but I do know that it can be a pain traveling with oil paints, and you can't travel with solvents. And so I felt really limited in what I could take, and that it would be a real pain. Watercolors are not so hard to travel with. And so I grabbed a journal, bought a few cool journals and some watercolor paints, and kind of practiced a little bit before I went on my trip, and then took the journal with me, and it was just wonderful. It's so nice to be able to capture while you're there parts of your trip that you might forget. Also, it does help with your drawing skills. I love painting of almost any type. Watercolors, oil paints. I really, acrylics are okay, but they're totally different. Oil painting in the studio is a much different, I have a different approach, I have a different start. It takes a lot longer. It's a lot more, I feel it's a lot more intense than having a journal and sketching. I feel a lot more able, I feel a lot looser and able to make mistakes without feeling like I'm ruining something. I mean, it's a piece of paper. It's an entry in a journal. You can rip it out. I mean, I'm not a big fan of that because then the whole thing starts falling apart unless it's bound with one of those little spiral things. But I don't feel like it's so devastating if I ruin a journal entry, whereas, you know, an oil painting can be more of a frustrating process. So I really enjoyed taking my journal with me, and years ago I made a cookbook for my family. My older girls were much younger, and I put together everybody in the family. I sent them a questionnaire and asked them to answer like 30 different questions about their favorite their favorite colors, their favorite number, where they went to college, things that the kids wouldn't sit and talk to the grandparents about, but I figured one day they would probably cherish them. And then I asked them to also provide their favorite, something that they cooked that the kids really liked. Everybody had their dish. My mom makes a dish called chili rice that's amazing, that all the girls love. That's like my birthday special. Nancy made like a beef burgundy that was amazing. And my dad would make homemade salsa, so he gave us his recipe for homemade salsa. And at the time, it was really just something that I did because I thought it was neat, and we were broke, and it was a nice gift that I could give that a lot of work went into, but it wasn't really super expensive. It was difficult doing it online, and I think I lost everything that I put in there at least 24 times, which was frustrating. So at least when I draw this out by hand in my journal, I know I'm not going to lose it on a website somewhere when I'm trying to create my cookbook. And I think maybe I will just then be able to photocopy the paintings that I've done and have them put together in a book format, maybe for Christmas next year for my girls or family. Surprise! I know it's only January, but now you know one of the little things you'll be getting for Christmas next year. And so I think it would be really a lot of fun to incorporate painting. I didn't paint when I did my last cookbook. Sketching a journal style with a cookbook, because after 33 years of being married, I have way more dishes that I'm good at than I did then. I think I had 3 then, mac and cheese and hamburger helper and maybe grilled chicken with lemon pepper. I've cooked a lot more over the years, and I have things that have become family favorites that I would like to put in a cookbook. And so I went to Pinterest this morning. I started looking through like watercolor cookbook or sketchbook cookbook, and there are some really wonderful ideas. And I would recommend, if you're going to do this, go to Pinterest and type that in and kind of look at the things that come up. They're very inspirational. All different styles, all different, everybody puts their own personal touch on their book, which is what I like. So this first demonstration is going to be, it's not the prettiest subject. It's my beef barley mushroom soup. And I mean, mushrooms are not necessarily the most beautiful thing to paint, but that's the season that I'm in right now, and it's something that my family really likes. And so I figure I would do my first cookbook journal page for that, with being my beef barley mushroom soup. And maybe in a couple weeks, when it's Valentine's Day, I'll do something prettier that's chocolate or strawberries. But I'm gonna kind of try to stick with my favorite dish of the month and do a journal, cookbook journal entry for that. So thank you for coming to my YouTube. I'm gonna go upstairs and film my painting, or I'll switch over to painting in a minute. If you like my channel, click like and subscribe, and I'll be back in 2 minutes upstairs setting up my paints. Okay, so I've got my setup done upstairs. It's actually 2 days later. The power of editing was supposed to be just a few minutes. Trying to get this arm for the camera and get the lighting correct has been a bit of a bear. I've broken 2 iPhone holders, and now I've got it propped up on my light. I guess you're gonna see the feet, maybe, yep, of my little holder until my arm comes in from Amazon that I ordered. That'll be here tomorrow on Prime. That is a metal arm that kind of allows you to overhead film. So back to the cookbook page. I got to play around with this for a few days, and I really, Shannon was homesick and had a lot of time on the couch. This is the first one that I did that's kind of rolled up. I was just kind of getting my, this is a Le Creuset that my mom gave me that I love. This is, then I kind of sketched out everything, my little soup scooper. And what I did, what I think that's really neat with doing a really easy watercolor sketch like this is you take your own things that are special to you. This is a cup that we had in my house growing up, a soup bowl. And when I saw them a few years ago when I was with my daughter Katie at Walmart, she was, I said, oh my gosh, look at that. Those are the soup cups that I absolutely love from when I was young. So what I did is I kind of copied this and made it mushroom soup because I'm cooking mushroom soup. But I think that if you get anything from this tutorial, it would be to take your own things. I am going to try to upload a copy of this, what I ended up doing for my first cookbook page. And what I did is I said, I played around with this like this, just kind of, this is the backdrop in my kitchen, everything else, my favorite soup bowl, my Le Creuset for my mom, and then the vegetables that go into it. This was me playing around a little bit more, with the brick background. It's actually kind of a limestone-ish thing that's in my kitchen. Playing around with the, how the stove looks. Practicing on onions and tomatoes and celery. And then I have, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little bit of sparkle paint on here, which I really like. It adds a nice touch at the end of a painting. And so then that was me playing around with a little bit more. So what I'm going to do now is just, the way that I did this is I think I took a paint box and actually set it on there and traced, because I don't have one of those nifty things from Michael's where they have a stamp where you can write your recipes out, but it kind of worked. I took a small watercolor box and traced it here. I took a big watercolor box and traced it here, and then wrote in the ingredients on one side and the directions on the other. And then I'm just going to add some watercolors to this. And I really think this is something that anybody can do. You can do a circle here for a tomato, a circle here for an onion. I did look on Pinterest and kind of looked at different watercolor onions, watercolor tomatoes to see what it looked like out there and what people were doing. And I ended up just kind of practicing on my own, but you can see, if you Google celery and click images, you can see a bunch of different images that are just actually pictures of celery. You can take pictures of your own celery. At any rate, I'm not selling this, and so there's really no clip art or anything. If you're doing a family cookbook that you're giving to your family, you can really take inspiration from anywhere. And there's just so much of it. So, Google cookbook pages and take a look at different things. What I ended up doing is looking at things that the way that I liked, the way that they were presented and laid out. And then I did a couple of different scenarios myself and ended up with a conglomeration of things that I liked. I like the boxes in here. Then I like putting a little quote at the bottom. But I've got my Le Creuset here. I've got my mushroom soup bowl. And then I've got the vegetables that go in here. I didn't put the stew meat because that's kind of gross to paint. And so this is my first cookbook page. So these are, let's see, I've got all my different watercolors. These are my Sennelier watercolors that I bought before we took our trip. And it was a small, I like it because it's a nice small travel pack. The colors are gorgeous. I ordered it on Amazon, and they're just really a lot of got your basic primary colors, everything that you possibly need in a paint set to do something like this. So I really like, on the look of the one that I practiced, I really like running the brick up the wall. I thought that would look really good. When I did it in this first one, I didn't like, it was stuffed up in the corner. It was just more of a seeing how I liked what I was painting. This one, I kind of put it together a little bit more. And so this is my final little guy that I'd like to use if I don't mess it up. And this doesn't have a huge palette, but it's kind of, because I'm not getting super fancy, it's pretty much all I need. I'm gonna start with the celery, and let's see. My head wasn't in there. Let's see. Nope. So I think I'm going to start with the celery. And I just, when you take it, I'm going to try to print this on YouTube, or upload this to YouTube so you can take it and print it yourself. You're welcome to use it to kind of practice on if you are not happy with your drawing skills or whatever. This cookbook for me is just going to be kind of a very casual, not a real stiff painting. After I had finally come upon a layout that I liked, which was this, and I'm just putting pure celery kind of green in here right now. And I love celery leaves. They're so loose and flowy. And what's nice with this style of painting is that you don't have to stay inside the lines. It's really not something that, when I do it, sketching is something like this, I don't like it to stay in the lines. So, I mean, that's just a real simple first wash of just plain green. I did this too to show you that when you use these micron pens, these are wonderful. I've got them at Jerry's and Dick Blick and wherever they're on sale, I'll pick them up. But this, when you put it on watercolor paper, once it's dry, which is almost instantly, doesn't run, and you can go over it with watercolor, and it doesn't smear at all. So that's a really nice feature of this. You can be out in the field watercolor painting, outside painting, and you can do the pen first. What I generally do is pencil first, then paint, then I go over it with the pen. What I don't like about that is it is better to wait for the watercolors to somewhat dry, because the pens don't work as well on even dampish paper. So, it's more of they will work. They just kind of fade in and out more than they would if you did it on a dry surface. Or almost dry. So I just put the green in there. Now I think, and I was going to show you the paper that I'm using it's not a journal that I'm using, but I think I got this at Dick Blick, Arches Watercolor cold pressed paper. And I have cold press and I have hot press. Hot press I've not used for a lot of things. I used it for a class that I took online, and it is very smooth. It is really good for painting flowers and things that are super detailed that you don't want the lines to squiggle. For me, what I like about watercolor is that it does surprise you, and usually in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But I like the way that it moves around on the paper. And in later tutorials, we'll go more into detail about wet paper versus dry paper. This is just basically going over my cookbook page. And so, but it does react differently on wet paper and dry paper. For instance, you can kind of wash your brush. I have 2 cups of water. This one's for dirty water, and this one is this is clean water for clean brushes. Both of mine end up dirty at the end. I don't know, but it's nice to have a cleaner one if you're trying to like go into a yellow later on and you really need to get all the yuckies out of your brush, you put it in the dirty water first and then the clean, and it cleans it somewhat better. But so now if you take, I've got a square, a flat brush, and I'm gonna take some red. And what is interesting to me is in working in watercolors, you work light to dark, and when I paint in oils, I paint dark to light. So you put in the shadows first and work from dark to light. Watercolors doing everything kind of backwards. Now let's see, I wanted to wet this to kind of show you. If you want, you can get this. And my grandson's here. I hear him. Let's see. Do y'all hear him screaming downstairs looking for Grandma? Let's see. Okay, so now that my grandson is gone, I'm going to try to use this handy dandy voiceover tool because it was my first demonstration video and I've got a little bit of a learning curve here, so bear with me. I'm back to painting and I had done the celery already with a light wash of spring green, and now I am painting the Le Creuset pot. And this is a pot that my mom gave me. And I think that when you're doing your own cookbook, it automatically personalizes it when you use your favorite copper pot. Or I would really love to see when everybody is doing their cookbooks. I'm going to create a site on Facebook, but for right now, Christine Marks Fine Art, you can publish there. I'd love to see a photo of the cookbooks that if you end up doing one at home. So let's get back to painting. I'm painting the Le Creuset pot, and it's this very pretty bright orangey red that's kind of an ombre. It's lighter at the top and darker at the bottom. So I'm just using really, I'm not dulling down my colors at all with my cookbook. A lot of times when I'm painting a landscape or something that is not, well, man-made, I mean, obviously you get these bright reds. Something in nature would very rarely be this bright, pure red. Maybe some birds, but generally I add a complementary color to tone it down a little bit and make it appear a more natural color. Le Creuset pots are not natural, so I'm using my flat brush and just going over that. The top of the pot is silver, so I'm leaving that alone. And gonna put the flame in at the bottom, and I'll start at the top with a little bit of yellow and then add a little bit of blue at the bottom of the flame, because on my gas stove the bottom of the flame is always this really pretty light blue. And it's nice because the watercolors will just kind of run into each other, kind of like a flame. And now I'm looking for the black to do my stainless steel stove. And you notice when watercolors are drying in their tubs, the purple and the black look almost identical. And I haven't used this set in a while, and so I forgot where my black was, but now I found my black, the bottom row, second from the right. And when you really water a solid black down for watercolors, because I don't paint adding white to my watercolors, you can, some people add a gouache or they actually have a white on the palette, but I don't like the way it looks. If you just water the black down and you look at it, it kind of comes across as a stainless steel on the paper. So I switched to a big round brush because the flat brush was too small. And we're going to paint the black or the light steel gray all the way down to the bottom, and I'm going to go all the way across to the right. Now I did touch up against the pan. If you didn't want I like the drippy, invasive nature of watercolor with things kind of running into each other. If you don't like that, just don't touch up against the bottom of the pan. Leave a little space in between your colors, and they won't do that. If you're working on dry paper underneath the object that you're working on, I don't mind it. I like it because to me it just reiterates that it's a watercolor, and I like it when the colors run sometimes where they shouldn't. Not always, but sometimes. And I mean, really, in the silver, it could be kind of a reflection if my stove is really clean, which is unlikely, but it could be. Um, and now I'm going to move on to the carrot, and these are all ingredients that are in my beef barley stew. I've got my carrot, my mushrooms, my tomato, and my onion and celery. And I just think the organic look of the paper just looks really nice together. So I kind of put a lighter yellow on the left-hand side to just kind of do lighter to darker. And then after I get the yellow and the orange, and I like them to mix together, so I'll pull the yellow a little bit into the orange into the yellow. Um, these are really vibrant colors. If you're working with a student grade set, which I don't recommend, you're going to have to work a little bit harder and use less water and more pigment when you're painting your cookbook. These come right off the paintbrush, just in they're more vibrant than any of the other ones that I use, these Sennelier paints. And then I'm going to drop a little bit of red to the right, just to kind of sneak over into the orange and add a little color variety. And that's it. I'll get the greenery later. And now I think the onion, I'm just going to work my way around the paper. The onion has this brown leathery skin, but it's not a dark brown. It's the Mayan, I think they're either sweet oso or Mayan Spanish onions that I get at Costco, are a very pretty yellowy with a very light brown paper skin. And what I like to see, that's too dark. I need to bring in some yellow and add some water. What I like to see is there's also some spring green generally if the onions are not overly ripe, which I also get from Costco from time to time that I have to throw out at the bottom of the bag. But the nice fresh ones have a beautiful kind of spring green mixed in with the yellow and the light brown skin. So I will add a little bit of spring green to part of the onion after I kind of just lightly wash it with the yellowy brown color of the paper. And I've got a few lines drawn in there with my pen. I'll probably go back after this is all dry and go over it with my Micron pen one more time. But I like to have some guidelines in there when I'm painting. And there's the spring green. I'm making sure not to touch the spoon. I don't want the spoon to turn yellow. So that is a soup spoon, kind of a skinny soup spoon. I should have made it a little fatter, but it'll be fine. It at least translates as a spoon. And now I want to darken the top where the stem was. It's always a lot darker with a big wad of onion skin paper there. It will run into the rest of the onion. I kind of pull it where I want it to go a little bit. And I think the green really actually helps it translate as an onion. Um, when painting it, it adds a nice little realistic color of green onion, greenish onion skin to that. We'll add a little, warm up the top a little, although that orange and red is a little too much, so I think I'll throw some brown in there. And a little more green. And that's not terrible. A little bit more, get rid of that red in there. And then kind of see what that does as it dries. I think next we're going to do the soup bowl. And I love this bowl. I don't know if I mentioned that my daughter bought them at Walmart. They are soup bowls that are replicas of ones that I had in my house growing up. And they say like chicken soup and tomato soup. The actual bowl that I used as reference when I was sketching this said chicken soup, I think. But I changed it to mushroom. Because when looking at it, I mean, my whole family knows that those are the soup bowls that I love and the ones that are in our cupboard. So, I mean, to make little changes like that, I think it would be a little crazy to have mushroom or chicken soup on a mushroom soup recipe picture. So, changing it to the mushroom, I don't know that my family even notices that there is not a mushroom soup bowl. But if you see to the left of the screen is the actual bowl that I used as a reference, and it has the recipe written on there. I just kind of suggested it. If I zoomed in closer, you would see, I mean, it kind of looks like lettering, but not quite. You don't want it to look like a commercial when you're painting, or I don't. I'm not a hyper realist. And so to just have the suggestion of writing, I think, is enough. And maybe too distracting if you're going for too perfect and writing in the actual letters on there. And I also didn't do a lot of the busy stuff that's around that chicken bowl. If you see on the left of the screen, I just didn't want that bright mixture of colors in the middle completely drawing your eye to the soup bowl. I would rather just fill in the lettering with the bright red and kind of leave it at that with a little bit of bluish black shading around the cup to give it a little bit of dimension, not much. Again, I don't want it to be necessarily the focal point of the recipe. And you can switch to a very small brush to do this. The round brushes have such a nice tip on them in general with the watercolors. And if you take care of them, which I don't, they maintain that nice tip. If you dry them and reshape them after you wash them and let them dry in the proper shape, they'll last a lot longer. So now we're going to work on the tomato. And again, I'm just really using, I'll put a little yellow in there to add a little bit of dimension. But I'm not mixing any complementary colors in. I'm just going with the pure reds and oranges. I don't know, I guess in the doldrums of winter, I prefer brightening up the content that I'm painting and a lot more color. I actually, I think, tend to tone it down a little bit in the summer when there's color everywhere. I don't know why that is, but this is a winter soup and I want my recipe to be nice and bright. Try not to get the soup bowl, but I think it's going to run into the handle anyways. And I probably should have curved my stem a little bit to go straight off the page like that. It's a little distracting, but
it's in there in pen, so I'm just going to kind of work with what I did on that. And that is way too solid of a green. I want to lighten that a little. You can pull it out, wipe your brush and pull out some of the color, or you can blot it with a paper towel if it is really annoying you. I don't want that stem so dark. And watercolors do tend to dry much lighter. You can see the brilliance on the carrot is already soaking into the paper. Your better pigments will stay brighter than your lower grade pigments, but they still all dry lighter than the original color that you put on there. So keep that in mind when you're painting. If you're unhappy with it, at the end you can always go in after it's dry and or while it's wet, whenever you want, and layer more color in there. Now the mushrooms, I think, which, like I said, mushrooms are not the prettiest object to paint. Some are, those pretty fairy tale ones you see with the red and the white dots on them. But these are the, just regular button. I think they're button mushrooms or white mushrooms that I use. Again, from Costco. Sounds like it's an advertisement for Costco. So they've got mottled brown and a white. Along the caps of them. And these I have just kind of crisscrossing behind the soup bowl. The one stem goes one way and one goes the other. It just kind of framed it around the soup bowl a little bit better. And I like the red actually coming in from the tomato on this. If it gets too strong, I can always pull some of it out. But again, to have them kind of melt into each other is pleasing to me, so I'm not going to really worry about that so much. And then a little bit darker for the stems or the bottom part of the mushroom. And before, I'm dabbing it a lot and wetting it. It's good to do some practice runs before you dive into your first cookbook page. Practice with the paper that you have and practice with the brushes and see how the water moves and dry brush versus sopping wet brush. It's good to kind of you can even make a photocopy of your sketching and kind of play with it, photocopy it onto some watercolor paper and see how it works out. There's nothing wrong with that. And then do the one that you're going to use for your cookbook and do it a little more carefully. Or you'll know things that you don't like before you start instead of discovering it along the way, like I did with this one. What you liked and what you didn't like. For me, I guess I'll just carry my knowledge into the next video and what to do and what not to do in the next recipe page. So I'm going to kind of pull a little bit of that red out, but not a lot. Add a little brown and just kind of darken it this way. And I am working on a flat surface. Sometimes people will work on a slanted surface with watercolors, and that's really neat if you're doing washes and you want the color to come down the paper. I also am working on, I had ripped the piece of paper out of the Arches book, and I would recommend when you do this, if you have a block of watercolor paper, either leaving it in the book when you do it, because then it doesn't start to curl like it's doing on me, or you can tape it down to a board so that it doesn't move, which is also something that most watercolor artists do, so that as you're adding water, the paper's going to start to move and curl, and that could be frustrating. I just kind of ignore it, but to do it properly, you probably would either want to leave it in the book. If it is a block, like a solid block, those Arches pages are solid until you rip that page off, and they don't tend to move a lot when you paint on them. So now I'm going to add a little bit darker color to the celery, and in the practice one cookbook page that I did of this with the celery, what I did do at the end is, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on detail with it. I'm adding a little ochre at the bottom there. But I go back through with my Micron pen when it's dry, and I add some of the ribbing, the lines that go in the celery, and I think that just makes a huge difference in the way that it translates. And so I will, in my next video, after this one's done and ended, I'm just going to let it dry at the end, but I will add the ribbing and show you how it looks with that. I just think to go back through with your Micron pen afterwards makes a fun difference in the painting, as does going in with sparkle paints. And I didn't do that in this one, but I have so many different videos planned for my cookbook in the future that I can use it in a future video. Now, let's see. I think we're going to do, I want to do the brick. It's not really brick. It's like a white with grays and browns tile that I have in my kitchen. And this is, again, part of you customizing your cookbook. I've got black granite that was there when I moved in. I'm not a fan of it, but I have a little backsplash of black granite, which I'm painting in behind my stove on this page. And I'm going to put it behind the Le Creuset, and then I think I'll probably run it over across behind the carrot just so it's consistent. And then I'm going to put what looks like my backsplash behind the pot and up behind the vegetables. I just feel like instead of doing splotches of color, the pattern would look really nice. And again, it's an additional part of personalizing my cookbook. So that when my kids get it, my mom, my family, that they know that that's my kitchen, my backdrop. It's so when you do your cookbook, if you have a bright yellow kitchen, you might want to have the bright yellow behind your pot, or whatever your backsplash looks like. You might want to make that suggestion. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed it up to 8 times the speed to get through this brick wall, because I don't think you want to sit and watch me painstakingly paint. And it's not, I'm kind of had glanced at the wall and have an idea. It's not the exact pattern of the tile, but it's a close enough suggestion that my family will know what it is. To the regular viewer, hopefully they just go, oh, that's a nice backsplash. And it varies between dark and light. And I just think it is a nice backdrop for this page to kind of highlight the recipe and the ingredients there. So I'm going to go back behind the carrot and then around the onion and the tomato, all the way up to the top where I'm trying to avoid the border, but I do want to get the little spot there behind the spoon. And again, it's very not precise. My tile, whoever laid this tile would say that's not it. But I think to the recipient and my family, they know that it's my kitchen backsplash, and I know that it is. So hopefully you don't have a very complicated backsplash behind your stove if you're doing a like one of those beautiful fruit cornucopias that some people have. You could really end up doing a heck of a cookbook page depending on your backdrop. Or you can just leave it blank. This can be as difficult or as simple as you want it. I just can't emphasize enough using things that your family will recognize as yours. Your copper pot, your soup bowl. I mean, a tomato's a tomato, right? So that's it. That's my backsplash. That's not the whole painting. Um, that is the backsplash. And let's see. We'll do a little bit of light silver, which is, as you remember, just really watered down black for the spoon. We're getting close to done. I'm going to put some silver on the pot lid, but I think I'm going to go over it with my black micron after everything's dry. And the pot, my Le Creuset is ombre. It gets darker on the bottom, but it's also a little dirtier on the bottom, and all the barkeeper's friend in the world is not removing it off of my pot. I don't know why. So I'm going to kind of splotch my pot up a little bit and brighten it a little bit because it's looking more like one of those pastel Le Creusets and not the really great bright orangey red. That I think when I put the tomato up in the top right corner after I had sketched this out a few times to try to figure out the layout, I do like the way the red is kind of scattered around the page. A little bit in the carrot, a little bit in a lot in the Le Creuset and a lot in the tomato. And so the reds and greens I try to kind of move throughout the whole painting. And I went back and forth on what I wanted to do the surrounding part of the recipe on, and I settled upon a nice celery green so that the reds and greens kind of butt up against each other throughout the whole painting. And that splotchy look on the pot is actually a lot more realistic. I'll kind of drag it over. It's a little darker at the top. Sometimes you can guide the water kind of where you want it to be. Maybe a little more bright orange on my flame. And there's the surrounding part of my directions. It's kind of faded. I don't like the way I can't see it very well. And I thought about a bright red, but I just thought that would be too much. It would just make it pop too much. And I think maybe take away the attention from the vegetables. And as you can see, my red ran into my little cup. Maybe I'll blot that out with a paper towel later on. But let's work on the color surrounding the recipe. I think I'll get some green and knock it down with some red. Add a little more red to my Le Creuset, I think to the top. So let's see. Kind of wetting it a little. I don't know if I want to do that because I don't know that I want it running into the bricks so much. Again, I do like it when it runs together, but not all the time. So I kind of want to keep those bricks separate. Let's see, a little bit of blue, a little bit of green, a little bit of red to knock it back to a more dulled down celery color, or a meadow green that doesn't jump off the page. I like that. Now, I didn't mix enough, obviously, to get around all 8 sides. And the paper's dry, so I do have to re-wet. Add a little more water. I think I need a lot more pigment. And it's not running into the brick yet, so I'm glad. More pigment. It probably would have been easier if I added a bunch more water and mixed in a bunch of pigment. But I usually work a lot smaller, and so I don't mix up as much color for the small areas that I work in. This isn't, I'm using a full page of this Arches, but I do like that green. I do like that knocked back green color for this. And I could go over the recipe cards if I wanted to, but I kind of like the white popping out a little bit. I mean, I could, it's not a problem going over it because the ink is dry and it wouldn't do anything to the ink, but it might just knock that portion back visually too far. I'm trying not to touch the mushrooms so that they don't all run in there, and there is a white border right there, so I think that'll be okay. Oh, yeah, the little, my grandson must have come in again. So now I'm back and going over this one more time. As I said, it dries really light. I am happy with the Le Creuset. Maybe darken the mushrooms a little, and now I'm just going to look over the whole thing and see where it needs any brightening. A little more green, never hurts to add a little green onto the onion. And part of the tomato there kind of washed out. And also my backsplash, touch up the tomato. I think there may have been like a 20-minute drying time in here in between where we just clicked back in. This stem is really bugging me, probably more because it's straight than the color, but I don't really want to add a leaf up there, so I just kind of want to, I'd like to remove it, but I can't because it's watercolor, so I'm just gonna do what I can to not draw attention to it. Widen it a little bit. It's a little skinny for a tomato vine. It's more like a cherry vine, so it should be thicker. And now the greenery on the carrot that I hadn't done, we'll kind of mix this, use the celery-ish green and plop in the leaves. Make them a little darker there at the bottom. And now this backsplash, which kind of had a little bloom there, this kind of fixes it. It just means I used too much water when I originally painted it. So I'm going to go over it with some black and hope that it doesn't do that again. It might not. We'll see. More pigment, and this is where I'd like to carry it over to behind the carrot. And I don't know if you noticed, I did a little quote at the bottom. And let's see, only the pure in heart can make a good soup. They say that's Ludwig van Beethoven. It was a soup quote that I liked. There are pages full of inspirational quotes that you can look up online. And that one just kind of, I thought that would be nice on this. So you can put your own quote at the bottom, or really anything that you want to put in there. And now I'm going to just add a little bit of dimension to the celery. Like I said, I'm still going to go in on my practice celery that I did. I went back in and kind of etched in the leaves. I do want to wait for it to completely dry to do that, but I'd like to add a little bit of dimension with the color as well, not just have it be a complete solid celery green. And the middle celery in there is a little darker because it's shadowed by the celery surrounding it. So just kind of darken that a little. And really that's about it. I hope you like this video. I will be doing another one next week. I may do 4 a month. I may do 2. That way I will have 24 recipes at the end of the year for my cookbook. But have a great day. If you liked my video, click like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next week. Have a wonderful week. Happy painting.